Hello, you're listening to Against the Vile Grain on WNYU 89.1 FM or WNYU.org. I got here on the phone with me today Alex Ford of begravd, expectance, and owner of Deathbed tapes. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, in the past year and a half, Deathbed tapes has come to some pretty cool prominence in the underground noise scene in Dayton and on Bandcamp. And you've put out some really big names in the power electronics and noise wall scene, including artists like Vomir, Richard Ramirez, Macronympha, Masana, and Controlled Bleeding. What was it like reaching out to some of these artists?
Well, actually, the first person that ever reached out to me about my noise was Leo from Macronympha. Back in 2017, he asked me to do a split with them. And I ended up working for his label after that for a few months, which put me in connection with Richard Ramirez and Vomir and a couple other artists. And when I started the label, I just reached out to them and they were super willing to work with me. Masana, that was a little harder. I had emailed him and then messaged him on Facebook, and the second he read my message on Facebook, he replied and said he wanted to do a tape, which was pretty cool.
That's awesome. You also have a collaborative project with Richard Ramirez, Expectance. Can you tell me how that came to be?
Yeah, it happened over Facebook. I did probably 5 or 6 releases with him before that, and he's always been my kind of number one noise influence, so I just thought it would be cool to do a collaboration with him, and he was all about it. So we've done 2 tapes now, we're doing a third one, and we've got some live shows planned too, so that'll be cool.
Sweet. Are there any classic artists in the scene or inspirations that it would be a dream to work with or that you'd like to reach out to?
Well, I tried A-Trax Morgue. I was in touch with Marco's sister, but there's another label out there that's already pretty much putting out, they're reissuing like 100% of his old stuff. Grim from Japan is probably the number one on my list right now, though.
That would be awesome. Grim is a really unique voice in the power electronic and noise scene with lots of influences from punk and Tibetan folk music. Deathbed is a tape label, of course. Why do you choose to print all of your releases onto cassette?
Well, I put out releases pretty quick, usually 1 a week or sometimes even 2 a week. So the fact that I can do it all from my bedroom is pretty important. I also work out of my bedroom, so I couldn't really justify doing vinyl. I probably will do vinyl someday for reissues and stuff, but I don't know, I like cassettes better than CDs, so that's just what I decided to go with.
Yeah, there's a certain physicality and nostalgia that cassettes have that CDs don't necessarily have. Richard Stevenson, who runs Noise Receptor Journal, in an article said, "The physicality of releases constitutes an integral part of the whole experience, which within underground circles will simply not be replaced by the current trend towards digital formats seen in the commercial music industry." That being said, a lot of people in the noise scene today complain that the internet has kind of opened the way for an excess of lazy music to be released. But, of course, Deathbed has released a lot from excellent artists who got their start on Bandcamp, such as Carrion Eater and Ritual Chair. Do you believe that this is a valid complaint?
Well, I mean, I got my start on Bandcamp as well, and they've always supported me. They've featured me 3 or 4 times on the blog, and their backstage plan through their pro account option is basically what keeps me able to run the label. I mean, there is a lot of lazy music out there, but I mean, I think if people like making it and like releasing it, then they should. For me, that's not really a valid complaint now.
And then in the older days, in the 90s, early 2000s, 80s, noise labels and zines were like pretty much the only way that people were able to discover new artists. With everyone having access to the internet now, what do you think is the role and importance of the modern noise label and the internet noise label?
For me, I think distribution is a big factor. I work with distributors in Amoeba in Hollywood and Industrial Coast in the UK and Ned's in Tokyo. And then I do American Damage in Chicago, and they're small stores. So I think just getting the noise into the right hands is important, and just reaching a larger audience, because a lot of labels have, I guess, bigger audiences than the artists themselves.
Do you create all the visual art for Deathbed releases?
There's a couple other artists I work with. Say, I think 4 or 5 of the releases have been collaborations with other artists that I know. But other than that, I do all of them.
Could you give us a little bit on the aesthetic choices and the thematic concerns of your artwork?
Well, my style I kind of developed before Deathbed came around. I used to follow a bunch of collage and Xerox artists on Instagram and Tumblr, and I kind of developed my own style, which I just kind of transferred over to Deathbed when I started the label. The projects I work with usually deal with heavier, darker themes, so I just try to reflect that with the art.
One of those darker themes I've noticed Deathbed has a fascination with is notorious killers and cult leaders. You've released the interviews and speeches and confessions of people like Charles Manson, Dennis Rader, and Jim Jones. What significance do these people, and more generally these types of people, have to you into Deathbed tapes?
I think there's a pretty big crossover between crime and power electronics and noise. I'm not exactly sure why. I think it's just the darker theme stuff. The Charles Manson interview that I released, I think the same interview was released by Cum, the White House label back in the 80s. And then the Jim Jones one was actually from an artist I work with. It wasn't really a Deathbed release.
Ah, I see. I would say that noise and power electronics are pretty fitting contexts in which to preserve those kinds of sinister archives. Well, that's about all we have time for today, but thank you so much for coming on the show and talking to us. Can you tell us some exciting things that Deathbed and yourself have in the future coming up?
Well, I'm curating a couple festivals here pretty soon. That'll be announced on my social media. I have new releases coming out every week, usually on Mondays. I got a really big Richard Ramirez tape coming out, so that'll be one to keep an eye out for sure.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Alex Ford of begravd and Deathbed tapes. Thank you.
Thanks.